The storage unit was supposed to be empty. That was the first thing that made the rest of it hard to explain. I'm not saying empty in the emotional way people talk about old spaces. Not silent. Not abandoned. I mean legally, physically, fully empty. Paid out, cleared, swept, lock change, paperwork signed. Unit 318 should have contained nothing except concrete dust and the smell of old cardboard. Instead, when I rolled the door up, there was a lamp already on inside. Not a bright lamp. One of those cheap standing floor lamps with a yellow shade, the kind people buy when they're furnishing a place they don't expect to stay in very long. It stood in the back left corner of the unit, plugged into the outlet by the cinder block wall, casting a weak pool of light over a single wooden chair. And on the chair was an envelope with my name on it. Noah. That was how it started. My name's Noah Barrett. I was 41 when this happened, working for a property management company outside St. Louis that handled the kind of places nobody notices until something goes wrong. Small apartment complexes, mixed-use buildings, and, unfortunately, a row of storage facilities out by the interstate where people left behind versions of themselves they couldn't afford to keep. I'd been with the company almost 7 years. Long enough to know that most problems have boring explanations if you give them time. Bad wiring. False move-out dates. Tenants lying because lying is easier than paperwork. I liked boring explanations. They age well. At that point in my life, I was also sleeping badly, drinking more coffee than water, and pretending my divorce had settled into the past simply because the paperwork had. It hadn't. That's not how those things work. You don't sign an ending and suddenly stop hearing the shape of another person in rooms they've already left. So yes, maybe I was a little more tired than I should have been. Maybe that matters. The facility sat off a frontage road behind a tire shop and across from a discount furniture warehouse with permanently faded banners out front. Long rows of beige metal doors. Chain-link perimeter fence. Camera system that worked when it felt like it. The manager had quit 2 weeks earlier, so for a while all the small failures have been rolling uphill toward me. Unit 318 belonged to a man named Howard Vale. Late 60s. Paid cash for the last 3 months. No emergency contact. Died in a rehab center 1 county over, according to the paperwork that finally reached us. No next of kin responding. State window passed. Lien process complete. Unit released. Which meant my job that Thursday afternoon was simple. Cut the old lock, inspect contents, document anything valuable, call junk out if needed. That's it. I remember the day very clearly because it had rained in the morning and then turned warm in that stale, temporary way Midwestern weather does when it's deciding whether to get worse later. The gravel lanes between the storage rows held little shallow puddles, and every tire sound lingered longer than usual. I parked the company truck near Building C, took the bolt cutters and clipboard, and walked down the row checking numbers as I went. 314. By the time I reached 318, I was already thinking about the next stop. A leaking water heater in a duplex across town. Maybe that's why the first strange detail didn't hit me immediately. The lock was new. Not factory new. Just newer than it should have been. Bright steel, clean body. No rust bloom. No scratches around the shackle. We had photographed Howard Vale's original lock during the lien process. Brass master lock. Old and dulled. Serial ending in 47. I remembered because I had signed off on the photo packet myself. This one was silver. Unmarked. For a second, I just stood there looking at it. Then I checked the paperwork again. 318 Howard Vale. Released. Same unit. I should have called the office right then. Maybe reviewed the audit trail before touching anything. That would have been the careful version. Instead, because work teaches you the wrong kind of confidence, I cut the lock. The shackle snapped easier than I expected. I rolled the metal door up halfway and saw the lamp. That weak yellow light in the back of a unit that should have been dead and dark. The wooden chair. The envelope. No boxes. No furniture. No plastic bins stacked in the corners. No evidence of recent move-out either. Just an empty 10 by 10 concrete box with one chair arranged, as if someone had expected me at a very specific hour and wanted the room to look deliberate when I arrived. There are moments when a person should feel immediate fear. I didn't. What I felt first was irritation. Because a prank means somebody had access, and access means reports, and reports mean meetings, and meetings are where other people act surprised by problems they quietly handed you. I stepped inside. The concrete floor looked clean. Too clean. Recently swept, maybe even mopped. The lamp cord ran neatly along the base of the wall to the outlet, and the bulb inside the shade gave off that old yellow color that makes everything feel a little used before you touch it. The envelope sat squarely on the chair seat. My first name only. Same block lettering you see on equipment labels and classroom cubbies. Not theatrical. Not threatening. Just certain. I picked it up. The paper was thick, like stationery from an office supply store that still sells things by the box. Nothing else written on the outside. No stamp, no logo, no return name. I opened it standing there in Unit 318 with the light humming softly overhead. Inside was one folded sheet. On it, in the same block letters, were 2 lines. You opened the wrong unit last time, too. Check the floor before you leave. I read that twice. Then I looked around the unit again. Still empty. Still that chair. That lamp. The sound of rainwater dripping somewhere off the roof outside. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. Because whatever this was, it was no longer office nonsense. Office nonsense doesn't usually assume a shared history you don't remember having. Last time, too, I went back outside and checked the number plate beside the door. 318. Then I checked the neighboring units for signs of tampering. 316 locked, dusty, undisturbed. 320 occupied, tag seal intact. When I came back, the lamp was still on and the chair was exactly where I'd left it. Which should go without saying, but it mattered to me then. Stability matters once something starts leaning. I called the office. No answer. Just the forwarding service and the sound of my own irritation becoming a message. Then I called Jamie, the maintenance tech who handled the facility before the old manager quit. He picked up on the 5th ring. "What did you break?" he asked. "That's optimistic. Do you remember Howard Vale's unit?" A pause. Which one was Vale? 318. Longer pause now. Then why? I leaned against the unit frame and looked at the chair. Because it's empty. But not exactly. That sounds like one of your divorce metaphors. There's a lamp in it. Silence. Then Jamie said, "That's not funny. I'm not trying to be." More silence. Then, door rolled up. "Yes." Chair in the back. I straightened a little without meaning to. "Yes." Envelope. I didn't answer fast enough. Jamie exhaled into the phone. "Noah, close it." "What?" "Close the unit. Put another lock on it and leave." I laughed once, mostly out of disbelief. "You want to try that again like a sane person?" But Jamie wasn't joking. I could hear it in the stillness on his end. "That unit wasn't empty when I checked it," he said. "What did you check it?" 2 months ago. Maybe a little more. For the lean photos? No. Howard called in a complaint. What kind of complaint? Jamie took a second. Said somebody had gone into his unit and taken the boxes, but left the light on. I looked back into 318. The chair. The lamp. The empty floor. Howard had a light in there. No. Then what was he talking about? That's what I asked. And Jamie gave a small, humorless breath. He told me if I saw the chair, I should shut the door and not read anything left on it. I said nothing, because in the absence of a better word, the conversation had started curving. "You're telling me you've seen this before?" "Yes." "And you didn't think to mention it when I took over the property?" "I thought it was old man confusion." "That doesn't sound like what you think now." "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." I looked down at the note in my pocket, as if I could feel the words through the fabric. "You opened the wrong unit last time, too. What happened when you checked it?" I asked. Jamie answered too quickly. "I didn't go in." That wasn't quite the same thing as an answer. "Jamie." He was quiet. Then I rolled the door, saw the chair, closed it again. And the next morning the old manager asked me why I'd opened 319 without logging it. I frowned. What does that mean? It means the camera showed me at the wrong door. I looked automatically at the security camera mounted above the lane intersection, 50 yards down. Its little red light was on. That bothered me more than if it had been dead. "You sure you weren't at 319? "Yes." "Why?" "Because 319 had the Christmas decorations." I remember looking at the red tubs through the gap before I got to 318. That detail sat with me a second. Not because it proved anything, because it was specific enough to sound like a memory fighting to stay upright. What was in Howard's unit originally? I asked. Paper boxes. Filing cabinets. One rug rolled against the wall. No chair. And now you want me to leave? Yes. What? Another pause. Then Jamie said, because if it's the same setup, there'll be something under the floor this time. That made me turn back, toward the unit immediately. The note said check the floor. I hadn't meant to say that aloud. Jamie cursed softly under his breath. Noah. What? Did you already read it? Yes. Then get out of there. I stood at the threshold, looking down at the bare concrete. The unit floor was clean enough to show every little imperfection. Small pockmarks, hairline cracks. One darker square near the center, maybe 3 feet across. I hadn't noticed it before because I was looking at the chair. What happened under the floor last time? I asked. You're assuming there was a last time for me. That made me angry in the useful way. Don't do that vague thing now. Not if you already know enough to panic. Jamie was quiet. Then he said, 3 years ago, before your time, the previous maintenance guy opened a released unit in Building A. Door camera showed A114. Interior photo, he texted the manager showed a chair, a lamp, and nothing else. I waited. 2 days later, Jamie said, they found him in a motel outside Columbia. What happened? He thought he was waiting for an auction pickup. Except the motel receipt in his pocket said he'd checked in there once before under a different name. The rainwater ticking off the roof outside seemed louder suddenly. And under the floor? I asked. Jamie's voice went lower. When the police came back to the unit, there was a loose concrete patch near the center. I stared at the darker square on 318th floor. They opened it. Yes. What was under it? A long silence. Then Jamie said, very carefully, another chair. For a second after Jamie said that, I didn't answer. Not because I was shocked exactly. Because once somebody gives you a detail like that, your mind starts rearranging the room around it whether you want it to or not. Another chair. I stood at the threshold of Unit 318, looking at the darker square in the middle of the concrete floor, and suddenly the lamp in the corner felt less like a prank and more like a stage direction. Noah, Jamie said, I'm here. Tell me you're leaving. I looked at the chair, then at the floor, then back out at the lane between the storage rows where a shallow puddle was collecting rain under the broken gutter. I need you to explain one thing first. You don't need anything first. Jamie. He exhaled softly into the phone. I could hear shop noise behind him. Metal clanging. Maybe a compressor kicking on somewhere. What? You said the previous maintenance guy ended up in a motel. Yes. Like he got confused and drove there. I don't know. That's not enough. It's what I have. I closed my eyes for a second. Every bad explanation in the world hides inside that sentence. What was his name? I asked. Darren. Did you know him? Not well. But well enough to say whether he was the kind of guy who just wandered into weird motels under false names? No. That answer came quickly. So there was at least one stable fact left in the world. I looked again at the concrete square. Did he read the note? Jamie hesitated. Then, according to the manager, yes. What did it say? I never saw it. What was he told? Another pause. That he'd opened the wrong unit before. I almost laughed, but not because anything was funny. Because hearing the same line twice in less than 5 minutes made the whole afternoon feel like it had been filed in advance. That's what mine said, I said. I assumed. No, you didn't. You recognized the setup. He didn't deny it. Rain ticked off the unit roof. Somewhere farther down the row, a truck door slammed and then started up, tires crunching over wet gravel as it left the property. The world was still behaving like a world. I hated that. Who else knows about this? I asked. Old manager did. Meaning he's dead now. That landed flatly. Not as a reveal. More as a weight added to the stack. He died because of this. I didn't say that. But you thought it. Jamie was quiet. Then he said, he had a stroke 6 months after Darren disappeared. Before that, he started locking certain units out of order. What does that mean? It means the computer would show one set of vacancies, and he'd give me a handwritten list that didn't match. I frowned. What? He said some units got confused if you left them empty too long. I let that sentence sit there. Not because I believed it. Because I had no clean place to put it. Jamie. Yes. Tell me honestly. Do you think this is somebody screwing with us? Or do you think you've just spent a few years working around something you don't understand and pretending it's admin error? He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had changed. Less irritated now. More tired. I think if it were a prank, it would have gotten sloppier by now. That was, unfortunately, persuasive. I looked at the note in my pocket. Check the floor before you leave. When you say loose patch, I said, what exactly do you mean? Cut square. Poured over clean. Like somebody had opened it before and wanted the repair to disappear. I stared at the darker square. Now that I knew to look, the seam around it became easier to see. Not obvious, but there. A faint hairline edge where old concrete met newer pour. You're still looking at it, Jamie said. Yes. Stop. I just want to know if it's really loose. Noah. I stepped inside anyway. The air in the unit felt warmer than it should have for a storage facility in late rain. Not by much. Just enough to suggest enclosure, or recent occupancy, or nerves pretending to be observation. My boots made hollow little sounds on the concrete as I moved toward the center. The lamp hummed in the corner. That was another thing I hadn't noticed before. A very faint electrical hum. Real enough to be reassuring and upsetting at the same time. Talk to me, Jamie said. I'm in. He swore softly under his breath. I crouched near the darker square and ran my fingertips over the seam. The concrete here was smoother than the surrounding floor, less pitted. Newer, yes, but not fresh. Maybe a few years old. Then I knocked on it with my knuckles. The sound that came back was different. Not dramatically hollow, just less solid than the slab around it. I knocked again, then on the older floor beside it for comparison. No question now. Something underneath. What is it? Jamie asked. There's a patch. Loose. Maybe. Don't open it. You think I brought tools for nothing? I think you brought tools for plumbing calls and storage liens. Not whatever this wants. The phrasing caught me. Whatever this wants. Not whoever. I hated that I let it pass without correcting him. I stood and went back to the truck for the flat pry bar and rubber mallet I kept behind the seat. Halfway there, I glanced toward the camera at the lane intersection again. Still on. Red light steady. If this was all some elaborate setup, then at least one machine was bearing witness. That mattered to me for some reason. Machines don't spook easily. Back inside 318, I propped my phone against the chair in the corner, camera facing the floor patch. Not because I was brave, because proof is a habit, and habits still help men when understanding stops. Tell me you're recording, Jamie said. I am. Good. That surprised me enough that I almost smiled. You don't sound like a man who wants me in here. I don't, he said. But if you're already being stupid, be documented. Fair enough. I wedged the pry bar into the seam. At first it resisted. Then, with one hard push from the mallet, the edge gave slightly, and a chalky crack ran across one side of the patch. A smell came up immediately. Not rot. Not sewer. Something old and stale, like paper boxed in a damp place for too long. I stepped back automatically. Jamie heard the pause. What? There's something down there. Noah, stop. I ignored him and worked the pry bar deeper into the opening. The square of concrete shifted again, heavier than I expected, but definitely separate from the slab beneath it. I got both hands under the lifted edge and dragged. The patch tilted up with a scraping sound that echoed too loudly in the empty unit. Underneath was a shallow recess, maybe 18 inches deep. Not a tunnel, not a coffin-sized pit, just a rectangular cavity cut into the slab. And inside it, exactly where Jamie had prepared me to be angry rather than surprised, was a wooden chair, smaller than the one under the lamp. Older too, dark wood, straight back. One front leg splinted with wire. It sat upright in the cavity, facing the unit door, as if someone beneath the floor had been waiting for the door to open. I stared at it for a long moment. There are only so many times in life reality gets to be cruelly literal before your body starts reacting ahead of thought. I felt cold first, then tired, then irritated all over again because none of those feelings helped. Tell me what you see, Jamie said. I swallowed once. Another chair. He was silent for a second. Then, that's enough. Get out. But there was something else in the recess. Resting on the seat of the buried chair was a small black cassette recorder. Portable. Cheap. Same kind people use for interviews in the 90s or church sermons they didn't want to miss. A strip of white tape ran along the top. Something had been written there in blue ink. I crouched lower to read it. Jamie was saying my name now, sharper, but it sounded far away. The label read, "Play this after you remember." I sat back on my heels without meaning to. The unit seemed to narrow slightly around the lamplight. Jesus, Jamie muttered in my ear. No, I'll leave it. I kept staring at the recorder. 4 years of handling properties, abandoned units, tenant deaths, evictions, water damage, mold, break-ins. All of it had trained me to trust sequence. Cause, effect, documentation. But that label didn't belong to sequence. It belonged to expectation. After you remember. Remember what? The note behind the chair, Jamie said suddenly. I looked up. What? In Darren's case. Manager said there was another note after they opened the floor. I gripped the phone tighter. What did it say? He wouldn't tell me exactly. Just that Darren read it and stopped acting like the unit was strange. The rainwater off the gutter kept ticking outside. I looked again at the recorder on the buried chair and started acting like it was familiar. Yes, that was bad enough to feel almost clean, because at least it pointed in one direction. Not toward a haunting, not toward a prank, toward memory, or someone using the shape of memory like a weapon. I reached into the recess and picked up the recorder. It was colder than the air in the unit. Not impossible cold, just the temperature of sealed ground and shadow. No tape case visible, no extra note beneath it. Only the recorder and the chair sitting below floor level like a quiet accusation. My thumb brushed the plastic window. There was a cassette inside, already rewound. Don't play it there, Jamie said immediately. I blinked. How did you know I was thinking that? Because I've met men before. I almost smiled again. Almost. Instead, I looked around the unit. Still just a lamp. The chair in the corner. The open floor cavity. The weak electric hum. What if this is all recorded somewhere? I said. The camera? Yeah. Jamie let out a short breath. You can hope. That was not confidence. I took the recorder and stepped backward toward the door. That was when I noticed something I should have seen sooner. The chair under the lamp in the corner was no longer facing the same direction. When I first entered the unit, it had been angled slightly toward the center. Now it faced the open floor cavity directly. I froze. Maybe I'd misremembered. That was the sane option. I tried it on for half a second, and it broke immediately, because I had leaned my phone against the chair to film the floor patch. The camera was no longer pointing where I'd left it either. It had slid sideways, resting against one front leg. Not fallen, set lower, as if someone had carefully adjusted it for a different shot. Noah, Jamie said again. I took another step backward. The concrete sounded too loud under my boots. What now? He asked. The chair moved. Silence. Then, very softly, is the lamp still on? I looked at it. Yellow shade. Weak pool of light. Still on. Yes. Then don't turn your back on it. That was a sentence I did not enjoy hearing in my own afternoon. I kept moving slowly toward the open door, recorder in one hand, pry bar in the other, phone tucked under my arm. The buried chair in the recess seemed to watch the exit just by the way it had been placed. The standing chair in the corner watched the recess. And somewhere in the middle of those two arrangements, I had become the moving part. At the threshold, I stopped and looked once more around Unit 318. The empty floor no longer looked empty. The lamp gave the concrete too much intention. What did the old manager call this? I asked. Jamie took a second. Then, he said some units got reused. For what? Another pause. For people who didn't finish leaving the first time. I stepped out into the lane, and the moment I crossed the threshold, the lamp inside Unit 318 clicked off. The lamp went out so cleanly it felt rehearsed. No flicker, no dimming. Just one quiet click from the back corner of Unit 318, and the yellow light disappeared all at once. I stood in the lane outside with the recorder in one hand, the pry bar in the other, and for a second the darkness inside the unit looked deeper than darkness ought to. Not supernatural, just abrupt, like a room closing its face. Jamie heard the silence on my end. What happened? The lamp shut off. He didn't answer immediately. Then, did you leave the door open? Yes. Close it. I looked at the black mouth of the unit. The chair under the floor was still visible in the weak gray daylight from the lane. The other chair in the corner had become a shape more than an object. My phone was somewhere inside near it. I left my phone. Then by another phone. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Instead I said, I need the recording. What you need is not to become the next weird story somebody tells from a front desk. That would have landed better if I didn't still have the cassette recorder in my hand, labeled Play This After You Remember. I looked down at it. Cheap black plastic. Slight scratch across the speaker grill. One of the battery cover corners chipped away. Ordinary object. That was the problem with all of it. None of it looked dramatic enough to deserve the pressure it created. Noah, Jamie said. I'm thinking. Don't. That made me smile in spite of myself. Just a little. Then I stepped back into Unit 318. Not because I was brave. Because men stay stupid longer when a thing has already taken their attention and still owes them one more piece. The interior was dim now, lit only by the overcast daylight from the open door. Enough to see the chair, the open floor cavity, the lamp outline against the wall. My phone sat where I'd seen it last, propped lower against the chair leg. I crossed to it without looking anywhere else, grabbed it, and backed out immediately. The moment I stepped into the lane again, the unit felt flatter. Just a storage space with no light on. I pulled the roll door down hard. The metal rattled against the track and slammed shut with more force than necessary. I threaded one of the spare cylinder locks through the hasp and snapped it closed. Then I stood there breathing a little too carefully while rain dripped off the gutter onto the gravel behind me. Done? Jamie asked. Yes. Good. Leave the property. I looked at the recorder. Not yet. He cursed under his breath. Noah, there's a tape. I understood that from a 1996 technology in your voice. I'm not playing it in the unit. That's not a better plan. It's the only one I've got. He was quiet for a moment. Then, where's your truck? 30 yards. Get in, lock the doors, and don't play it until you're off the property. That sounded fair. I walked back up the lane toward the truck, every now and then looking over my shoulder at Building C. The security camera at the lane intersection still showed its steady red light. The puddles still held the same dented reflection of the roofline. Nothing in the world had moved enough to justify how much mine had. I got in the truck, locked the doors, and sat there with the recorder in my lap. Rain tapped the windshield lightly. Jamie was still on the line. You there? He asked. Yeah. You shaking? No. That was mostly true. My hands weren't shaking, but some quieter part of me had begun to move around inside its own boundaries. I put the recorder on the passenger seat and pressed play. The tape hissed for a second. Then a man started speaking. My voice. Not similar. Not close. Mine. Same flattened consonants. Same slight drag when I'm tired. Same way the last syllable of a sentence lowers if I'm trying not to sound worried. For a second, I just sat there staring through the rain-spotted windshield, because there are only so many ways a person can hear his own voice on a tape he has never seen and still keep the world arranged the same way. Then the voice said, if you're hearing this, you opened 318 again. I stopped breathing for a beat. Jamie said, what? I held up one finger, even though he couldn't see me. My voice on the tape continued, calm and a little thinner than I sound in my own head. Don't go to the office first. That wastes time. Check the floor, take the recorder, and leave before the light shuts off. I looked automatically toward Building C. Too late for that. The voice kept going. You won't remember this part yet. That's normal. Rain moved slowly down the windshield in thick silver lines. I said out loud, to no one and both of them, no. Jamie heard me. What is it? I didn't answer him, because the tape was still speaking in my voice. You made the same mistake with the motel in Richmond. You stayed for the second call. My chest tightened so sharply it almost felt clean. Richmond. Room 12. The disconnected phone. The receipt with my name on it. The old sealed wing behind the motel. It had happened 4 months earlier. I had never told Jamie about that. Nobody at work knew the whole thing. Hell, I had barely told myself. My voice on the recorder went on. If the chair is under the floor now, that means you took too long last time. Don't try to figure out whether Vale is part of it. He isn't. He only kept the unit because it was quieter than a motel. My hand was gripping the steering wheel hard enough to ache. Jamie's voice came through the phone, sharper now. Noah, talk. I picked up the call again. I hadn't realized I'd lowered it. It's me, I said. What? On the tape. It's my voice. Silence. Then a single word. Okay. That was the most useful possible response. No argument. No immediate disbelief. Just room. The tape hissed. My recorded voice continued in the same flat, practical tone. If you're on the property alone, that's bad but manageable. If Jamie is with you, don't let him open any numbered room after dark. I turned slowly and looked at the phone in my hand. Jamie said, what did it say? I closed my eyes for a second. It knew your name. He didn't speak. Neither did I. The tape rolled on. You'll want to know what again means. Don't. Not first. Memory is how it gets the angle right. Once you start trying to line things up, the places do it faster than you can. I stare at the recorder. The places. Plural. Motel. Storage unit. And whatever Darren had walked into in between. My voice lowered slightly on the tape, as if I had leaned closer to the recorder when I made it. If you already remembered Richmond, stop the tape now and drive west. Don't check your mirrors until you hit county roads. That sentence entered me in a way the others hadn't. Because I had remembered Richmond. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to know there had been another receipt. Another room that seemed to know me before I accepted it. Enough to know I had left with less understanding than fear. And enough to know I had not come home the same. Jesus, Jamie muttered when I told him. I pressed stop on the tape. The truck went quiet except for rain and engine tick. Neither of us said anything for a while. Then Jamie asked, "What's Richmond?" I leaned back in the seat and looked through the windshield at the gray lanes of the storage facility. A motel in Indiana. Why were you in Indiana? Work. That's not what I meant. No, I said. I know. He let out a breath. You think this is connected? I think my own voice just told me it is. That wasn't enough for either of us, but it was all I had. I looked at Building C again. You said the old manager gave you handwritten vacancy lists. Yes. Did he ever keep a map? Not of tenants. The actual buildings. A pause. Then, in the office, maybe. Why? Because a shape had started to form in my head, and I didn't like its symmetry. Richmond had an old burned wing that still sat behind the motel under newer numbering. Jamie had just told me some units here got reused. The tape had said the places, not the unit. Not haunted rooms. A route. Or a set. Or a pattern built out of addresses and numbers, and people who happened to arrive already tired enough not to trust the gaps in themselves. I need to see what's under this property, I said. Jamie gave a short laugh that had no humor in it. You just opened concrete and found furniture. Maybe let curiosity lose once. I'm not curious, I said. I'm cornered. That quieted him. Then he said, the old site plans might still be in the manager's office. Shed out by the front gate. I looked toward the office shack near the entrance. Small prefab box with smoked windows and a fake stone skirt around the bottom. Empty since the manager quit. You have keys. Yeah. Come here. Another pause. No. I turned to the phone. What? Noah, listen to yourself. You're sitting in a truck with a tape of your own voice telling you not to repeat mistakes, and your next idea is to drag somebody else physically onto the board with you. He was right enough to irritate me. I need another set of eyes. You need distance. Jamie. No. I rubbed a hand over my face. Then stay on the phone. That I can do. I started the truck. The tires crunched over wet gravel as I drove toward the office shack. The place looked smaller now, like all administrative spaces do when whatever they've been filing starts pushing back through the cabinets. I parked nose in near the door and killed the engine. The recorder sat on the passenger seat between us like a third presence in the truck. You armed? Jamie asked. With what? Office supplies. That's a no. That's a no. Great. I got out, Rain immediately finding the back of my collar, and unlocked the office door with the emergency key ring from the truck. Inside smelled like wet carpet, toner, and old cigarettes layered under air freshener. Metal desk, filing cabinets, corkboard, a wall of labeled keys, and a monitor bank showing camera feeds in low-resolution gray. Every screen was live except camera 6, the one covering the back lane by Building C. That screen was black. I stood there looking at it. Jamie. Yeah. Camera 6 is dead. When? I don't know. Silence. Then, that's the one facing 318. Yes. Of course it is. I moved to the manager's desk and started opening drawers. Tenant files, deposit slips, insurance binders, an old revolver holster with no gun, candy wrappers, batteries. Bottom drawer held rolled site plans secured with rubber bands gone brittle from age. I pulled them out and spread the biggest one across the desk. Original facility layout. Buildings A through D. Units mapped in long rows. I followed my finger to Building C. Then I stopped. Because according to the original plan, there was number 318. There was 316. Then a utility corridor marked only with diagonal hash. Then 320. Number 318 at all. My throat went dry. Jamie. What now? On the original layout, 318 was never a unit. The line went completely quiet. Then, very softly, he said, "What's in its place?" I looked closer. The corridor had no tenant designation, just a narrow rectangular strip between units, running deeper than the others and ending at a boxed area with no label. "Service access," I said, "or something they didn't want rented." And now it has a numbered door and a lease history. The fluorescent light in the office buzzed overhead. Rain tapped the front window. I stared at the plan while a new thought formed, one that made the recorder on the seat behind me feel heavier, even from across the room. Jamie. Yeah. If 318 was added later. I trailed off, because just then, through the office window, I saw someone step out of the rain and stop beside my truck. He didn't look up, didn't knock, just stood there in the glow of the parking lot light, one hand resting lightly on the passenger side door, exactly where I'd left the recorder. And when he finally raised his head toward the office, I realized two things at once. First, I recognized him. Not from work. Not from the facility. From Richmond. He was the man who had stood by my truck outside the motel. Second, he wasn't alone this time. Because reflected faintly in the rain-dark glass behind him, standing near the rear corner of my truck with the same patient stillness as furniture arranged in a room, was another man I also recognized. Darren. The maintenance guy who had disappeared 3 years earlier. He looked older, tired in a way photographs don't prepare you for, and he was holding a motel key tag in one hand. Room 12.